Should I shoot RAW or JPEG? RAW or JPEG? Hey guys, it's Nemanja and welcome to another fun episode. Yes, this is the episode where I will talk about RAW vs JPEG files, what are the advantages or disadvantages, what do I use, what should you use, etc. So let's start first by explaining what both of RAW and JPEG files are. RAW file, as the word suggests, is file that is raw, uncompressed, unprocessed file that contain all the informations that a camera sensor collects. So there are everything there, information about the colors, about the highlights and shadows, so dynamic range, information about white balance, etc. A lot of infos are there. On the other side, JPEG files are compressed files, and the compression that is used is lossy, so that means that some informations are removed from the image, so there are not as much information as in RAW files, and they're already processed files by the camera software inside the camera, so they're completely processed files. I like to compare RAW and JPEG files to a food. And yes, maybe it's a stupid example, but I will tell you anyway. So RAW files is like preparing your own food, your own meal. So you need all those raw ingredients to mix them together, to put some salt, some pepper, some spices, maybe some oil, some vegetables, meat, I don't know, whatever you're cooking, you're preparing. And then you put everything together, put it in oven, and when it's done, you can eat your own meal prepared by your own taste. So however suits your taste the best. And JPEG files are like fast food, or it doesn't need to be fast food, it can be a restaurant. So like a restaurant, like you're going to a restaurant and already finished meal is served to you. So you cannot change the ingredients, you can change something, you can put maybe a little bit more salt or a little bit more pepper, some spices, etc. But you cannot remove some vegetables or put more vegetables in that, because that's already baked, cooked, and bring it out to you to eat. So RAW files, like raw food, you can tweak them, do whatever you want them in post-process, and then when you tweak them, you can bake them like you're making JPEG files out of the RAW files, and JPEG files are already baked in the camera, so post-process in the camera, and you're limited in what you can do to JPEG files. So now let's talk about some technical aspects of RAW and JPEG files. JPEG files are 8-bit files, so that means that the JPEG file contains 256 shades of red, greens, and blues. So basically 16 millions of colors. So that's a huge number, 16 million. But RAW files can be 12-bit or 14-bit files. So 12-bit RAW file contains 4,096 shades of red, greens, and blues, comparing to the 256 of JPEG. So that's huge number. That's around 68 billion colors compared to 16 million. Big difference. So a lot more of information to work with. And 14-bit RAW files, it's even bigger. It contains more than 4 trillion colors. So that's crazy huge. Also, RAW files contain higher dynamic range than a JPEG file, so that's really big advantage, because you have a lot more information on the shadows and highlights in RAW files, and that means that you can recover some overexposed or underexposed photos much better than you can do it with JPEG files. Of course, in JPEG files you can recover some shadows and highlights, but not drastically as you can with RAW files, because you don't have so many information in JPEG files. You will see that later in a real example. Another cool thing is that RAW files are not sharpened by the camera software like JPEG files are, so that means that you can use any kind of sharpening method that suits the image best yourself, or you can just sharpen parts of the image later in Photoshop. You can decide on that too. And RAW files has completely built-in white balance that you can change later in post-production if you, for example, missed a proper white balance on the shooting, but with the JPEG you cannot do that in that way. Again, you will see that on a real example. And another cool thing that you can do with the RAW files is that you can use them as a proof that certain images are yours. So that's really cool that you cannot do with JPEG files. Okay, now let's go in Lightroom and let me show you on the real examples the difference between RAW and JPEG. Right guys, we are here in Lightroom and as you can see we have some examples for today. We have both JPEG and RAW files side by side so we can easily compare them. And we will start with this photo right here because it's extreme. This is a great example to see the difference in the amount of data between RAW and JPEG files. Let's press D on the keyboard to go to develop module, and as you can see this is a JPEG version of a photo that I took a few months ago when I was in Portugal. And this is a way underexposed photo, so now it's completely unusable. And for example, I was there for just a few seconds and I had a chance just to take one photo of this place and then I needed to go to some other place and I missed the exposure completely. That could happen to anybody, no big deal. Okay, I went back home, I saw the photos and I saw that this is a completely underexposed photo. But fortunately, I shoot in RAW. So I had both RAW and JPEG files. And now I will show you how you can recover this photo from a RAW file and what you can recover from a JPEG. So this is a JPEG file, a lot of dark spots. This is a RAW file, a little bit brighter photo, less contrasty photo. And it is a little bit desaturated compared to a JPEG file that is already processed inside the camera. So let's tweak RAW file first. We can open the shadows all the way up and we can already see some details right here. But we need to crank up the exposure too. So let's do it something like this. Let's bring back the highlights. Okay, maybe this is too much. And we can maybe add this gradient filter to make sky a little bit more blue. And now this is completely usable photo. So I have only this photo and now it's usable. I recovered a lot of details here. I can put it on social networks and show my friends. I can print it, etc. Of course, there are a lot of noise here in the shadows, but I can live with that because before this photo was completely unusable. Now we can go and see what we can do with the JPEG version of the same file. So if I had this photo, only this photo, and took just the JPEG version of this photo, that would be a problem. So you will see. I can again open the shadows. I can see some details here. I can open the exposure a little bit. You can see this, not good at all. Bring back some highlights, etc. Open the exposure a little bit more. Not good at all. So let's compare those two files. Let's select both of them and let me show you. This is a JPEG version, this is a RAW version. So let's zoom it here, and JPEG version is completely damaged, unusable compared to RAW file that is really nicely recovered. Yes, it has a noise here, but this noise is for me no problem at all, and the file is completely usable. See the JPEG version, see the RAW version. So that's a main difference between RAW and JPEG. So let's go to another example and let me show you how you can recover some highlights from a RAW file compared to a JPEG file. So we have this sky. It's a little bit blown out. It's a little bit overexposed photo. As you can see, we have no details in the midtones, almost nothing, and the shadows here, especially blacks. But this is a NEF, or the RAW file. NEF is the RAW file from the Nikon cameras. So this is a JPEG version. They're practically the same. Okay, and now what we can do, we can recover some highlights a little bit, then we can lower the exposure like this. We can put some contrast in, we can dehaze it a little bit, and we have some really nice usable sky that we can put in our composite image or whatever. But this photo is completely usable. So let's do this with a JPEG file. We can recover highlights, bring down the exposure a little bit, add a little bit of dehaze. But it's a little bit bad. It's not good as a RAW file. And now if we compare it and zoom it, you can see that a JPEG file, come on, zoom it please. Okay, JPEG file is a lot more damaged than a RAW file here. So not good at all. This is usable. This is completely unusable for me. You just saw the difference between the amount of information that you can recover from shadows and highlights, both in RAW and JPEG files. And now I will show you what happens if you accidentally miss the proper white balance on a shooting and you're shooting RAW and JPEG. How you can really easily set the right balance later in post-production in RAW files, and how you will struggle with that using just JPEG files. So let's do it. Right guys, this is a photo that the white balance is completely missed. So this is a JPEG version and this is a RAW version. So let's start by recovering by setting a right balance on a RAW version. So I will zoom it somewhere here where I think some gray color should be. So maybe this wire holder should be gray, and I will use this eyedropper and set a white balance here. Let me see. Not bad, maybe a little bit more magenta, and this is nice. I like it like this, so it's really nice. Let's do the same with the JPEG file. So let's zoom it right here. Use the eyedropper tool, set white balance here, and so again, a lot of magenta. We can recover that. Maybe to add a little bit more yellow or not. See how we can struggle with that because we don't have full control over the white balance. We can just change some kind of a tint here. So temperature, there is no temperature, that's completely different settings, but here we have a temperature in kelvins, all the range that we have in camera too. So this is the JPEG version that we cannot recover completely. We will struggle with that a lot, but we could never get something like this. So this is another advantage using the RAW files over the JPEG files. There are a lot more examples that I can show you today, but I don't want to waste your time, and I think you got a point. So the main difference between the RAW and JPEG files is that the RAW files contain a lot more information about the colors, about the dynamic range, so highlights and shadows, white balance, etc. than the RAW files. So basically all the information that camera sensor can pick up. On the other side, JPEG files are compressed files, so some information are lost from the image, already processed by the camera, etc. So you can still recover some information from the JPEG files, but not as much as you can with the RAW files. There are some advantages and disadvantages for both RAW and JPEG files. So advantages of using RAW files are all that I already said before. So huge amount of information about the colors, white balance, dynamic range. You can tweak them a lot in post-production, and you can recover a lot of details both from highlights and shadows, etc. Disadvantages of using RAW files, well, for me there are no disadvantages, but there are some photographers that like to talk about disadvantages, so I will point it out. So disadvantages of using RAW files are, for example, they're much bigger than JPEG files. So they will occupy more space on your memory card and hard drive. For me, that's not disadvantage because today the space, the memory cards and hard drives are bigger and cheaper. Okay. Then another disadvantage is that transferring files from memory card to computer is a lot slower than transferring your JPEG files. Well, okay, it's not a big deal. I will go and make a tea and my files will be transferred. I will go do something else, read a book or go to lunch. I don't know if I have huge amount of files. So for me, that's not disadvantage at all. And maybe another one is that you need to spend a lot of time retouching them, post-processing them. Well, I love to do that. I love to tweak my own photos, my own files. I love to tweak my RAW files because I have more possibility, more information to tweak them to make a look how I like it. So I like to prepare my own food that will suit my taste. I don't like to go to eat fast food. Okay, sometimes I like to go to fast food. So sometimes I take JPEG files out of this camera and I just send them to my friends or post them on Facebook, Instagram, etc. But the truth is that even then I tweak them a little bit. Okay, some advantages of using JPEG files are they're smaller, faster to transfer, occupy less space in a memory card and hard drive, and they're already processed, so you don't need to process them if you don't want to. But I always supposed to ending processing JPEG files too, just a little bit. Then disadvantages of using JPEG files are all opposite than advantages of using RAW files. So less information about colors, dynamic range is smaller, then white balance cannot be changed later, you cannot tweak them as much as you can RAW files, and you cannot recover as much details as you can from shadows and highlights in RAW files. So Now it's up to you, what do you like to use and when do you like to use. So for all beginners there, I know that I was beginner once, so I know that I was completely confused either to use JPEG or RAW files. And when I realized what is the difference, I start to use RAW files, and from then till today I'm always using RAW files. Sometimes I'm shooting both RAW and JPEG files. So for example, my camera has 2 memory cards slots, so one memory card is for RAW files and another I'm using for JPEG files, so I will have both of them. At the end, it's all up to you, what do you like to use and what kind of situation you're in. If you're a professional photographer, I highly advise you to shoot RAW files because you will have a lot of options later. Alright guys, I hope that this video was helpful to you, that you learned something new today from this one. And if you have any questions regarding to this episode, please let me know down there in the comment section below. I will be glad to answer them. Have fun, experiment with both RAW and JPEG files, see how you will post-process them and if it makes sense for you to shoot in RAW. Have fun and see you in my next fun episode. Bye bye.